vast reaches of space, our blue-green planet circles around its star. Radiant energy stirs the solid stuff of matter and moves the water and the air. For billions of years, this process has supported life.
Elementary life forms have prepared the way for us. For eons, they've eaten away at the bare rock, building up the masses of nutrients needed to maintain more complex forms of life. Because of our origins within and dependence upon life and how it grows, the life process has long been a matter of interest and study for curious minds. At the dawn of our scientific age, a Dutch biologist, Jean-Baptiste van Helmont, conducted an experiment. In 1652, he wrote, "I took an earthen vessel in which I put 200 pounds of soil dried in an oven. Then I moistened it and pressed into it a shoot of willow weighing 5 pounds. After exactly 5 years, the tree that had grown weighed 169 pounds and about 3 ounces. But the vessel had never received anything but rainwater or distilled water. In the end, I dried the soil once more, weighed it, and got the same 200 pounds I started with, less about 2 ounces.
This experiment provides hope for today. It showed that most of the substance that made up the willow tree's mass, 169 pounds, came from air and water only. Air and water that can be found practically every place on Earth. It means that if what we want from the Earth is a good, healthy life for ourselves and our children, the basic demands we make on the planet are minimal.
Among the millions of creatures on Earth, human beings alone have shown the remarkable ability to create according to their wills. But our spirits and their ability to create are thoroughly enmeshed in the stuff of the earth. Our spirit has no boundary. But does our body have a boundary? Most of us would say it does, our skin. But if we consider all the things that cross that boundary in both directions, we see ourselves in a different light. Look at this knot. We'll pass the rope continuously into the knot at one end and out the other. Before long, all the original material that made up the knot will have passed through. But its basic pattern will not change. It's the same with your body. Bodily materials change totally every 7 years, most of them within a single year. But the basic pattern of your body and of yourself remains the same. In a material sense, all that we have been and all that we will be is in the soil, water, and air about us, our environment. So when we dump into the environment, we dump on ourselves.
Water, which makes up most of our body, continuously cycles all over the Earth. Every time you drink something, there are molecules in your glass that have been to every corner of the globe. They've come from oceans, lakes, quiet swamps, and rushing rivers. From glaciers, icebergs, and tropical forests. From frost, fog, and dew.
They've been in clouds, high in the atmosphere, and in vast reservoirs deep in the earth. Most of the water molecules in your glass have also been in and out of countless other living things. In fact, you may well have shared your drink with every form of life that's ever lived on Earth.
Green plants, too, are an essential part of our own selves. The cycling of carbon compounds and oxygen between people and plants provides us with the energy to live and returns to plants the carbon building blocks they need for their growth. Through these and other cycles, the substances that nourish all living things are shared.
Recent studies of the atmosphere have revealed a fascinating relationship between our planet and the life it supports.
It seems that the atmosphere acts like the feathers of a bird or an animal's fur, in that it makes adjustments which maintain a suitable and protective environment for the life it enfolds.
This observation leads to a radical hypothesis. Our planet, soils, water, atmosphere, and all its inhabitants, is one single living entity, all of its components interdependent. For some of us, viewing the Earth as a single living organism is a retrieval of ancient wisdom. But for others, it's a new concept with the power to change the way we treat the planet and ourselves.
The chemicals that life found on Earth and most of the compounds developed by living things have been with us for at least 1 billion years. It's an inventory to which we're well adapted and which until recently has been relatively unchanged. Human beings now create thousands of new chemicals every year which inevitably find their way into the environment. Some are harmless, some cause serious problems. Only a small portion have actually been studied.
Most of us do very little to harm the environment. However, as the mathematician said, very little, multiplied by a couple of billion, is very much. Vast numbers of people, each making a small contribution, have produced great wonders. But by the same token, millions of small injuries to our environment can add up to massive injury. Furthermore, as societies, we make collective assaults on our surroundings by organizing huge industries to turn resource supplies into the thousands of things we like to have. We often do so without considering the repercussions of production on such a vast scale.
All of the interconnected activities of humanity are felt by the living world as if they were the actions of one being. We are found in every inhabitable place on Earth. Millions of acres of our crops mine the nutrients of the soil. We consume whole forests and mountains. Oil wells are like drinking straws in our mouths.
It is the size to which humanity as a whole has grown, coupled with the might of the mechanical and chemical technologies we use, that have finally brought us into confrontation with the natural world. How big have we grown? How big can we become?
To answer these questions, we need to understand something called exponential growth.
One example of exponential growth comes from a legend. The king of Persia offered the inventor of the game of chess anything he wanted as a reward. The reward requested was 1 grain of wheat for the first square on a chessboard, 2 grains for the second, 4 for the third, 8, 16, and so on, doubling for each square. The king agreed, thinking it a modest request that would cost him little. But the amount of grain for the last square alone would have filled a train of boxcars wrapped around the Earth at the equator 25 times. The king simply didn't understand exponential growth and would have had to give away his entire kingdom.
The reason we're so easily deceived and subsequently astonished by exponential growth is because, at first, the increases seem very small and sustainable. After all, Quantities can double hundreds, maybe thousands of times before they become significant. However, at a certain point, it takes only a few more doublings for the numbers to become very significant. Clearly, anyone telling you that our growth in material consumption or population can be sustained is, like the king of Persia, unfamiliar with the nature of exponential growth.
The truth is that exponential growth in production and population over the last several generations has fundamentally changed our relationship with the Earth. For thousands of years, humans were a tiny presence on vast continents, thriving with other forms of life. Slowly, more and more people learned more and more ways to change and influence the world around them. With improving healthcare and mechanization, both our population and technical strength have grown ever more rapidly. For the last 30 years, single decades have seen more growth and more consumption than have previous centuries and even millennia. Today, we influence practically everything on Earth, even the life processes on which we depend. Our tremendous growth has brought relative prosperity and abundance of human life at the expense of the environment. We overuse and deplete our resources, forests, minerals, soil fertility. We're living on environmental capital. By depleting that capital, we steal from future generations. A little over 100 years ago, a new word came into our language: ecology. Ecology is the study of how living things interact with each other and with their environment. It includes the flow of materials between organisms, mutual dependencies, and the factors that limit growth. Ecologists have deepened our understanding of two categories of limitation. First, the limits of tolerance.
Exposure to intolerable climatic change, for example, or to dangerous substances.
Second, the limits of resource supply.
The depletion or absence of nutrients or other vital materials. The staggering proportions of human activities are bringing us exponentially closer to those ecological limits.
In the past, some civilizations, unable to accommodate these limitations, either succumbed to them or were forced to move elsewhere. For today's global civilization, accommodation is the only answer. Moving elsewhere is no longer an option. We're approaching the limits of tolerance in more ways than one. And the limits of resource supply are all too familiar.
One of the most dangerous responses to resource depletion is the tendency for nations faced with shortages to make war on other nations to supplement their supplies. Resource control has long been a driving force in armed conflicts. It was the motor of colonialism.
Colonial powers were able to impose their wills on an unprecedented scale because they had a monopoly on industrial technology. But as we've learned in Vietnam and Afghanistan, now that everyone has access to industrially produced weapons, powerful nations are somewhat less invincible than they used to be. Nonetheless, old habits are hard to change.
The fact that $400 billion are spent annually on military activities around the Middle East oil fields is a warning to take resource limitation very seriously. If Armageddon is to be fought, it may well be between large, non-sustainable economies trying desperately to control disappearing oil supplies.
Fortunately, environmental concerns have become popular knowledge. And we're beginning to recognize that environmental problems are in fact economic, political, and social problems. So are the solutions. Today, we're at a crossroads. We can either change our ways, or we can carry on business as usual and let our children deal with the consequences.
In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development, sponsored by the United Nations, tabled its report, Our Common Future. They served an urgent notice that current development trends, if not modified, would diminish the Earth's capacity to provide for future populations.
The World Commission emphasized an important concept: sustainable development. That is, development that meets the needs and aspirations of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The question is, which of our activities are sustainable and which are not?
If you agree that heedless development is a threat to the future, there are guidelines to help us identify the activities we must ease up on, those we must stop, and the areas with abundant opportunities for sustainable growth. These are the Guideposts for a Sustainable Future.
On the one hand, activities to be avoided. Obviously, something is not sustainable when it requires a continual input of non-renewable resources or uses renewable resources at a rate faster than they can regenerate. It's also obvious that our future is not secure if our activities have a cumulatively degrading effect on the environment.
There are two further dangers which may be less obvious, but which are no less serious. They are causing the extinction of other species and consuming more than our share of world resources. As long as 1/4 of the world's population consumes 3/4 of the world's goods, then billions of people in the poorer countries will be forced by poverty to overstress their environment in order to supply us and scratch out a living for themselves. On the other hand, activities which can be sustained. Those in which material resources are managed in continuous cycles, and where the energy required to advance the cycles comes from continuously available sources.
Some people, seeing these guideposts, have said, wait a minute, this means a return to the 1800s. Not so. Many of the exciting developments of the last 100 years are sustainable.
Communications technology, for example. We could establish a communication system that would enable anyone on Earth to talk with anyone else on Earth. Think how this would foster small business development, how it would unify peoples and nations and debunk propaganda.
Much that is new in healthcare is also sustainable. And there are numerous other innovations that can improve the quality of our lives without threatening the future. In fact, we can meet all the requirements of a full, healthy life without stretching the planet beyond its limits. By facing ecological reality, we learn that some kinds of growth are life-supporting and others are life-threatening.
Some doors to development will close as we discover unacceptable dangers. But other doors to activities which are sustainable will remain open. One important area of sustainable growth is based on the rich potential of being human.
It's often argued that developing personal relationships and other human potentials is more rewarding, durable, and satisfying than the accumulation and consumption of material goods. However, in our society, the implications of this argument are often subverted.
Our final guidepost, then, encourages activities that are life-based. Communication, creativity, coordination, appreciation, spiritual and intellectual development.
These areas provide abundant scope for economic development and for individual growth. Furthermore, because life-based development does not depend on material resources, it's not likely to cause organized conflict. Quite the contrary. By developing human potentials, we increase our personal satisfaction and simultaneously reduce our territorial and material needs.
At the same time, the more we develop our skills and abilities, the more we can help others grow. Sports, music, and other creative activities give pleasure to both participants and observers. As we develop our own inner calm, we can help others find calm in their lives. As we increase our understanding, we can help others to understand. The prospects for the future improve when we place more value on the quality of life than on the quantity of goods we consume. There's plenty of opportunity for enterprise based on human skills and ingenuity, which will not stress the earth.
In the past, enormous tasks have been accomplished when societies identified a common goal. Today, we face a challenge as great as any that faced our ancestors. We know the problems and most of the solutions.
There's no question about our ability to put things right. After all, human beings make all the decisions that affect our relationship with the earth.
The question is, can we agree that our goal is a sustainable future?